If you're doing any type of larger project, then I would say that free software isn't always free.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 249, How to Choose Between Open Source and Commercial Software. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, we've spent a lot of time over the years talking about build versus buy, but that's usually for the whole system. We don't really talk much about creating the applications from scratch, and then do we decide, do we use libraries? Do we follow the not invented here strategy? In other words, we write everything from scratch. Where do you think we're at nowadays for this?
I don't know. I mean, it's never everything from scratch, right? You're not building your OS. You're not using Java or whatever you're doing without a library, right? It's never from scratch. It's more, at least in my head, from where we start, right? Between 0 and 100, kind of what is the starting point, right?
You pulled out, we never write our own operating systems. Okay, look, I said it wrong. Here we go again. A business, if we're building a business application.
Yeah.
Okay, so the operating system is already there. The runtime platforms are there. We're building the business application.
And Spring Boot is there as well.
Well, Spring Boot may or may not be there. Who knows? Well, on today's show, we have Hadi Chami on from LEADTOOls. Hadi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. So what's your take on this? Now, LEADTOOls is a vendor, so we'll come to their talk about what they have a little bit later. But how do you approach this? Now, being a vendor, you actually throw a new twist in this. Do I build everything from scratch? Do I use open source libraries, or do I consider using potentially commercial libraries? And how do I decide which way to go when?
The way that I've always looked at it is to always look at it trying to save money. I know it may seem confusing since we're talking about free versus paid for a vendor, but when you look at time as money, when you go to open source, you have to maintain it yourself. You have to implement it yourself. You have to figure out how it works. You have to work with the open source community to understand it. And then once it's in, you have to continue to maintain it throughout the years. And so that, requires developers to understand the code base, understand the open source frameworks, and then continue to maintain it and keep up with the updates that are pushed versus going with a vendor who can handle all that for you.
So are you saying right now that free software really isn't free?
It can be in certain scenarios if you're doing a one-off or something small that doesn't require too much continuous development. But if you're doing any type of larger project, then I would say that free software isn't always free.
Yeah, I guess it probably also depends a lot on the scope of or what is available right now, right? Probably, like we mentioned earlier, right? You're not going to take a commercial operating system probably, or let's say not run an alternative to Kubernetes, right? So it probably depends also on what is available in one side or another, right? And the scope of that something.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It really depends on the application and the scope of the application.
So let's go back to my initial question. If I'm trying to figure out, I'm writing my business application, whatever it is, and I'm trying to decide, do I write the things that I need to do? Do I pick something off the shelf, open source, or do I go towards a vendor solution? What are the right questions I need to be asking myself to come up with even a clue to get me into the ballpark?
Usually when I come up, as a developer myself, when I come across that kind of decision, writing it myself, I have to understand the requirements. If it's something that is supported by the operating system or by the framework that I'm using, like Java or .NET, then I'll probably write it myself. If it's something a little more complicated and I go to a quick Google search and I look it up and I find the different libraries that are out there, compare the open source ones, compare the vendor ones, is the open source ones continuing to be maintained? Is there a large community supporting it? Or is it just, one or two guys who did it 5 years ago that they're no longer maintaining? And so all those questions really need to be asked. And then when you move to the vendor side, usually you're not, a hobbyist developer kind of going to use commercial vendor. But if it's like a business application in this scenario, you have to look at the pricing, understand the pricing model, the licensing model. Is it perpetual or is it royalty? And then how does that factor into, their support, their maintenance, and how will that, affect the application we're trying to create in the business? Are we selling this to our customers? Is this going to lower our margin so that way we're not making any more money by buying a vendor? And so there's a lot of questions that need to be asked.
Let's stick with that pricing model just for a second, because you brought up some old school names, perpetual. You didn't say subscription explicitly, but let's throw subscription in there. You threw in, what was the other one that you said? It was
royalties.
Royalties. You typically don't think of software as royalties. You typically think of royalties, books, music, that kind of stuff. Why would I, as a developer, or maybe a team manager in an organization, even think that royalties was going to be good for me? It's great for the vendor, but I cannot see any use case to where that would be good for me as the actual consumer of that.
It goes back to the, the buy versus build. If you're going to buy it, it's going to come with a cost. And so if the licensing model is royalty or subscription, like you mentioned, which is more modern, it's a matter of comparing the cost of doing it yourself and maintaining it and having a team of developers paying them salary to maintain it versus paying, a small royalty to the vendor or to subscribe monthly or yearly, and just weighing the pros and cons and the money on it.
How do you keep somebody honest when you've sold them a royalty license?
Most companies, at least that I've seen, they want to, be honest. They want to be compliant. They're all working with the same legal system. There's always going to be certain companies and certain developers who try to cheat you and try to, work around the royalties, but you can't plan for the thieves. You have to accept the fact that, some people may not be honest, and that's just the cost of doing business sometimes.
I guess coming at it from where Victor and I sort of work, which is in a complete subscription model for the two companies that we work for. That's how, we end up getting paid. This concept of libraries, it's like the companies we work for have end products. There's not libraries. It's a hard lift for me in 2023, now 2024, because now it's February, to justify spending that. I mean, I don't even see how I could justify that kind of spend. How can we convince people that it's not a horrible idea to pay for libraries that you might be using within your apps?
It's a very valid concern, and it's a concern that, we deal with since, we are a vendor, commercial software library vendor. A lot of customers who, come to us, they ask those types of questions, and just being open and transparent with them. The libraries themselves are closed source, as you can imagine, but having very robust demos and sample source code and tutorials around those to show that, the actual libraries themselves are closed source. But if you look at the demos, look at the tutorials, look at the rich history of the company, you can see that we're a valid company that will bring lots of value to your company and your product.
But we've seen over the years that just because a company has been around forever, Enron, WorldCom, the list goes on. I mean, if I'm building my base application wrapped around all your, not just LEADTOOLS libraries, but anybody that I'm paying for, I can't just take that. I need the source code in escrow. Is that something that people still try to do?
We've had a few people kind of ask that same kind of question, but most, I'd say 99% of customers, they don't ask that question. They don't worry about it. They trust us, and they understand that that's just the cost of using a commercial vendor. That's going to be something that they use in their application, and they understand that these are libraries that are embedded in their app, and so they don't. If something does happen, there's a vulnerability or something that crops up, even if it's baked down into the vendor's libraries, at the end of the day, it's their application, their company that's taking the hit. Their clients are the ones that are complaining. They're the ones that are losing money. And that's something that, we take into account when we do business. We provide, support, 24/7 support if needed, free support every day. And so that's just, something that we have to deal with and have to understand. And that's something our customers will have to understand as well.
By the way, it's not free support. Its support is included within your subscription pricing.
Very true.
Details. I want to go back to vulnerabilities because this is interesting. We know how to deal with vulnerabilities in open source. You put a PR in, pray it gets merged, and the release gets cut. So that's the easy part, actually. That may take minutes to days to weeks to months. But now, once that has been cut, even from open source, it may take me as the person consuming that library another 9 months, 12 months, years to get it changed because I'm doing that. Now I come to a commercial vendor and it's like, hey, there was a security vulnerability in that. Here's the new version. Go and have a great time. That doesn't make me feel very warm and fuzzy because number one, I do have to trust you, but I don't even trust myself. So how do I juggle these two balls? I get confused.
Part of that, if there is a vulnerability, all you have to worry about is, did the vendor fix it or not? And if they did, what version was it fixed in? Let me just pop it in and off I go. I don't have to worry about the vulnerability anymore. You don't have to actually understand what the vulnerability, how to fix the vulnerability. You obviously have to understand what the vulnerability makes vulnerable, so to make sure you weren't affected by it. But for the actual fixing of it, you would just reach out. Hopefully that's something that we were already aware of, fixed, and have a fix for. Or if not, we'll get a quick turnaround on, since, vulnerabilities are very important. But it's just something that, we'd have to fix, and the customer or the user of the library doesn't have to worry about fixing. They just grab the newest version and plop it in.
And I guess you probably, I guess customers cannot find vulnerabilities in closed source, right? You're probably announcing them to them or something like that, right? What is discovered or things like that, right? Or is there a mechanism how I can discover that as a user, right?
There are certain softwares out there. I forget exactly which ones, but there are some out there that can crawl through closed source and find, if any vulnerabilities are affected by it. That's how, every once in a while we'll have a customer come and they'll say, hey, we, ran your libraries through XYZ software and it reported these 5 vulnerabilities or whatever. Do you have a fix for them? Typically the answer is yes, we were already aware of these. You're on an older version, just update to this version and you're good to go. And it's a, quick 10-minute chat and they're off and ready to go.
That is, you may have heard of the book, The Joys of Cooking. What you just explained was the joys of decompilation. That's exactly what that is. I have to admit, though, the issue I run into with this is, and I'm extremely guilty of this, and I want to see what your take on this is, because you've said it a few times, so I'm going to try to be as polite as possible since you are our guest. But to believe that just because a vendor says, here, just go drop this in and everything's going to be fine. Don't you realize I have other things going on? Don't you realize that this is going to cause me unplanned work that I just can't deal with? How do we as vendors sort of help people make it not so painful?
Part of it is realizing that if it was something that was written with open source or from scratch and there's a vulnerability, that's still, regardless of where it came from, you still have to do work to repair and replace that vulnerability. Ideally, getting a new library to drop in place of the old vulnerable library would be a lot easier on them, other than having to do regression testing and QAing the new build. Ideally, we'd make that as easy and painless as possible, but that's just part of software. Is there will be some painful days where you have to deal with the unexpected.
All right, let me go a little bit different direction here, because we're talking about backporting things effectively, and you would stay on a reasonably fixed line. But you, as the vendor, have already probably developed the next major point release, and you found these things and you're backporting. In an open source world, most of the time you don't see crazy levels of backporting. You might see 2 or 3 levels. I'm thinking about a few different projects of how they do it. As a vendor, though, and I've been in your spot before, we had to maintain backports for over 8 years worth of releases. Is that something that still happens today?
It does. Maybe not 8 years worth. Generally, there'll be a service plan and agreement where, it's kind of agreed that only the current and 2 most recent releases would be maintained. And there are always exceptions to that, since we are a commercial vendor and you are paying us, we will make exceptions to go fix an older version that's 8 years old. But typically, our customers, stay close to the current release, because we're always releasing, enhancements and features throughout the years that our customers want to get and include in their application. But you're right, there are some customers that they get a version that works and they never move from it. And if there's a vulnerability on it, even if it's 10 years old, they'll need a patch for it. And so that's something that we've done occasionally.
That kind of aging feels like you're using Visual Source Safe somewhere, like pre-everything. Maybe even some RCS, even before CVS. I don't know. It's those kinds of scenarios, because I've lived those scenarios before, are not pleasant.
No, they're not.
But if somebody's willing to pay for it,
exactly,
it's sometimes worth it.
Yep.
So let me come at it a little bit differently. With LEADTOOLS, just generally, big umbrella, you create libraries. As a vendor, how do you decide what kind of libraries to create? Do you sort of poke at open source? It's like, oh, that's pretty good. Or do you obviously you talk with existing clients and find out what other things they need, but what's the strategy in 2024 of how do I keep growing this business?
So there's 2 kind of different approaches that we take. Generally, when you're talking about, new libraries, you're talking about new frameworks or languages. So say we started out with low-level Windows C, and then, throughout the years we realized, hey, this, C# thing and this Java thing is kind of getting pretty popular. Maybe we need to port our code to this new language. And just recently we ported over to Python, since, that's getting more popular now. And then there's new features. And so new features are generally one of 2 avenues that we get. Typically it's, customer requests, hey, this customer's doing XYZ with our tools. It would be kind of natural for us to support this other feature. Is this something you guys do? And then we look into it and we say, no, we don't, but it's actually a pretty good idea. Let's add it to our feature request list. And then we can work with the customer into an open beta with them, and then eventually release it within the SDK. And then the other avenue for new features would be just ideas internal to the company. We've been in business for over 30 years. We've had developers working in this space for just as long. And so, as they work on it, they have their own ideas, and those ideas turn into features that are included with the SDK.
So what is the space that LEADTOOLS is in? Is it just general libraries, or is it really specific items?
It's actually pretty specific. It's within the imaging and document space. So we have, an imaging library that's, if you think of Photoshop and all the different things you can do with Photoshop, we can do all that programmatically through libraries. So you could build a Photoshop-like app, using our libraries. We're in the document space. And so anything dealing with PDFs, barcodes, anything like recognition, extracting text from images, we have libraries to support that. And then we're also in the medical space. And so I don't know if you guys have heard of the DICOM specification, but it's a fairly comprehensive and large specification in the medical space for dealing with x-rays and CAT scans and MRIs, and how to store that, how to load that, how to process that, and communicate that across different devices.
So what you're telling me is you're providing the vision for our our AI overlords to figure out if we have any kind of problems in our body.
Yes.
Is that pretty much it? Okay,
Yep.
Good. That's what I figured it was. Imaging has been around for a long time, whether people think about it. Documents has been around for a long time. If you've ever filled out a mortgage application, you had more documents than you could care to even look at in your life. Why are we even concerned about documents anymore, other than it's what makes the world go round? It seems like, where was the promise of this paperless world? We still shouldn't have documents. It should just show up in a web form and that's it, right?
Yeah, I've been hearing about paperless for quite some time now, and every person I talk to is still dealing with paper every day. And I don't think it's going to go away fully. But even if it does, or, if it mostly does, there's still, PDFs and storage of these documents, of these web forms, can't all just be in a database somewhere. They have to be, viewable and ingestible by users. And most people don't want to look at SQL queries and database rows. They want to see it nicely formatted in a PDF.
Well, that actually brings up an interesting point. I was sort of poking at AI, but it sounds like AI is nothing but slurping text and processing it. But then it's gone beyond that. It's now AI is being trained on images, being trained on any kind of digital asset. I imagine you're starting to play into that space a lot.
Yep.
Or at least I would have to guess. What have you been hearing from your clients, especially in the AI space, whether they're doing real AI or fake AI? We can probably talk about that for a while too, of what's real and what's not. How do people see having a supported solution, non-open source, of helping them actually get whatever they're doing to market? Because what you don't actually have an end product other than the libraries, correct?
That's correct, and also
incorrect. Okay,
incorrect.
Okay, but the vast majority of what you have is libraries.
Correct.
That's your bread and butter.
That is.
So if people don't pick you and they pick, I would assume, at least competitors to you, I mean, why are they coming for those kinds of solutions? Why wouldn't they just build that on their own? That one I think I have an answer for.
Our competitors are other commercial vendors, but our main competitor really is the open source. And it's a lot of what we've been talking about, for the past 20 minutes or so. It's the buy versus build. And so that's something that when I go to a trade show and I'm standing at the booth and someone walks up and they say, why would I use your OCR? Why wouldn't I just grab Tesseract and use that? And we actually had a customer do just that. And, they grabbed Tesseract and they used it for 2 years. And then they realized that they were spending way more money trying to maintain and fix it themselves and all the issues that they had with it. And they turned to us and bought our tools and haven't looked back since. And so, if they run into an issue, they just send us a quick email. They say, hey, I ran into this issue. They report it to us. We report it to our team and get it fixed for them, without them having to spend any more time and money on it. And so that's one thing that, I try to talk about is, open source isn't always free. And then on the other point with, the other vendors, there's a lot that sets us apart from the other vendors. One being that, as I mentioned, we're pretty wide in our scope within this vertical of the imaging document medical space. We compete with some other vendors that just do the PDF. They do it well, but then if you want to also, read the barcode in the PDF, you'd have to get a second vendor to read the barcode. And so you'd have one vendor for PDF, one vendor for barcode, each with their own subscription, each with their own support and maintenance plan, each with their own issues. Whereas you could use our toolkit, which supports both, all within the same libraries. And so you can convert to PDF, read the barcode, and then off you go without having to worry about paying two vendors.
That actually brings up an interesting point. You use the word toolkit. That is what you have. And that was something I hadn't thought about is, okay, I need a library for this. I need a library for this. I need a library for this. And that may not be a big deal if you only have one library, maybe even two. But when you start adding more or different types of things that then need to talk with each other, that's when having a purpose-built solution can save you a lot of time and a lot of money and hopefully a lot of lawsuits.
Exactly.
Because you've got somebody else to blame.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true.
So let me ask this question. The company went and tried to use Tesseract. They were successful, right?
Yep.
2 years.
Yeah, they used it for 2 years.
For 2 years. That, to me, that is success. But then they started weighing against, okay, this is taking too much time, too much money, whatever. And they came back. Are you based on any open source inside of your libraries?
I don't have that information. I believe all of our, open, we do have some open source libraries, and it's all, on the website and the fine print. For OCR specifically, I think it was all proprietary. And so it was all kind of built up, from the ground up, from scratch over the past 15, 20 years. And so, if you look at the different OCR engines on the market, there's Tesseract, which is the most popular open source one. And then in the, commercial space, LEADTOOLS OCR is, one of the most popular ones in the commercial space.
We were speaking about updates, vulnerabilities in open source. How do you deal with that yourself? The few things that you do have non-proprietary, right? Or even, issues in the language itself. So how do you deal with those cases? Do you put it back there or fork it and then maintain it? Or
generally with the open source that we have used, it's a fork. And so it's something that we maintain.
So you're taking on technical debt.
Yes.
Oh, dear.
So the customer doesn't have to.
Well, I was hoping you'd finish the sentence that way. And that seems like a good selling point, at least to me, if I had the money to do it. I imagine the people buying the software from LEADTOOLS have money. Let's just put it that way. And they may have lots of stupid money if you really want to go a step further. If you wanted to talk to somebody that is in, now, company's been around 30 years-ish, right?
Yep.
If somebody's starting today and they're wanting to build commercial libraries, be it OCR, be it not OCR, doesn't matter. Let's keep OCR out of it so they're not competitors to you.
Okay.
What kind of instructions would you give them? What do they not realize that they're getting themselves into?
That's a big question. I wasn't around when this company was started. I've been here only 10 years or so. I've been in the support department pretty much the whole time. And so, there's a lot of work that goes into, building these libraries. Just grabbing open source and wrapping it and saying, here it is not going to cut it. You have to be innovative. You have to understand what you're trying to solve, understand the problems that the customers will have an open mind and open communication with the customers. That's very important. Understanding what they're trying to do, the issues that they're trying to solve and that they're running into when trying to solve them, and how can this toolkit or library come in and solve that for them in a way that can save them money or save the next customer money.
That's interesting. You've been in support-ish for 10 years.
Yep.
Within this company. What has changed over these 10 years for you?
So I was just a support agent, when I started. And so it was pretty overwhelming since, I went to college and learned, C and Java, and then coming here and realizing that those aren't the only two languages in the world. And those aren't the only two languages that the toolkit supports. And so I had to learn on the job, oh, hey, there's this C# language that's pretty popular out there that a lot of customers are using. It's kind of similar to Java, but it has its own quirks and its own IDE and everything. And so, that was a change going from being a academic programmer to a professional developer. But it was fun learning how people in the world use coding languages to make money. I remember one of my early chats, I was chatting with a guy using our toolkit. He had been in software for 25 years. And I was a kid, straight from college, barely 8 months into my first job, supporting him, telling him, hey, this code that you have is not working the way you think it's working. here's how you should do it. And that was very interesting to me, realizing that. And then, after my first 2 years, I got promoted to assistant manager. And then shortly thereafter, I was managing the department. And that's where I've been, ever since for the past 8 years or so.
I'm so sorry that you're a manager. So you have to deal with people all the time.
Yes. I have 3 kids at home, so I'm managing
then
all
you're
day.
going to the office as a day off.
Exactly.
As an escape. Okay, got it. Right. It was interesting that you said coding languages to make money. Now, it sounds like you graduated from college 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in that area, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You're just young. I'll put it that way. For somebody that's been coding since 88, I will say there's been a Cambrian explosion of things in the past 10 years. Let's put on our goggles and look ahead 10 years. Where do you think it's going? Are we all out of jobs?
No.
Actually, you won't be because you're a manager, but Victor and I may be out of jobs.
I don't think so. I know that, it's been a big question out there with ChatGPT and all the AI that's been coming out. But I've been working with AI since it came out, both internally here and then also, using like ChatGPT and others like it. And I've been working with customers who are also, using it. And AI is amazing and it's really cool. But in my mind, it's just another tool in the tool belt to use. It's going to change the way that developers code and the way that they work and their efficiency. But if you just try to get, some AI to write code for you, it's not going to be great. You have to look over it, check behind it, and actually incorporate it into your application.
No, wait, that means that we still have to think when AI writes code for us?
Unfortunately.
It just sounds like we're sucking up to the AI overlords and trying to make... I don't know. I'm like you. AI is AI. It's one step beyond machine learning. But I'm not too scared yet.
Yeah.
People using it are going to be dangerous, not to you. Just like, people using whatever we had before, right? People who don't switch to something new are in danger, not because of that new thing, but because of people who do use it.
Yeah, I was reading an article where good developers will be a little more efficient using it, but bad developers will be a lot more efficient using it because, they don't have to think as much. If they're dangerous enough to get it working, then they'll be a lot better off using the, chat GPTs. And so people who don't switch over to using it may be more in danger, like you were saying.
Let me pose this question, because I hadn't really thought about it until now. How is AI and using AI any different than using a library or a framework?
One thing is it's more expensive. Another is sending requests off to ChatGPT. It's all text-based for now, other than, your images that you can send off. And then it's all, internet enabled. There are a few offline LLMs out there, but none of them are that great because it doesn't have as much training data. You have to train it yourself. And so that's one thing that sets it apart, using a library versus using, some type of API that talks to a AI.
Well, Magic Handwave, let's assume that we're able to run everything inside of 4 walls, which I imagine most of your clients, thinking imaging, thinking especially medical, they are not, we hope, we pray they are not internet connected.
Right.
We know that that's not true, but let's believe that for a moment. If you think about it, though, AI is the new framework. It's the new Spring Boot. It's the new whatever, right? It's just a new way to get, well, at the end of the day, an LLM is a data store, correct?
Yeah, at a high level.
And then it's got a wrapper around it to help interact with that data store.
It's a different type of database in a way.
Yeah, that's quote unquote all it is. So are we saying now, let's make it less scary? AI isn't going to take our jobs. A database is going to take our jobs.
Yeah, it's a different language, right? With Postgres, you speak SQL, and with ChatGPT, you speak English or Spanish.
Yeah.
But it's just a change of a language, not much more than that, right? In both cases, you need to be more specific you are, the better results you get.
Very true.
So LEADTOOLS is at leadtools.com. Tell us a little bit about what LEADTOOLS, we've already talked around it, right? It's imaging, documents, medical, those kinds of things. But give us the nickel tour real quick of, what, if I was wanting to use LEADTOOLS, who do I need to be the perfect customer?
I mean, just any developer that's looking to add, some of the functionality that we have to their application. That's really it. As we've been talking about, OCR libraries, we have different recognition libraries, imaging libraries, and medical. So that's really the perfect customer, someone with the need that can program. And even with AI nowadays, they don't really have to program that much. They know how to program that much.
Which languages are the sweet spot? We talked about Java and C# earlier, a little bit of Python. Are those the bigs, or are there, when I think OCR, I still think C++. So what languages do I need to be working in if I want to use the libraries from LEADTOOLS?
So we have, we started out in C and C++, like you're thinking, but as we've been talking about, we wrapped it and we've ported it to different languages. I think our, sweet spot would be C# and Java. Those are the main two kind of server side languages. And then we also have, the web-enabled libraries in JavaScript.
Oh, I was happy up until you said that last one. And then everything just went sad at that point. Okay. And it seems like, with it being February, you were saying that there's a new release out or close to being out?
Yep. As I've been saying, been around for 30 years. We are on version 23, just released, of our toolkit now. The three kind of biggest features, along with all the different updates and enhancements that we've done, would be the spreadsheet editing that we added, the object detection AI framework. I know we've been talking a lot about AI, so that's pretty relevant. And then one personal favorite of mine is the new and improved medical web viewer, since I've been actually helping the medical team, work on that and get it out the door and released.
Tell me more about that one, because that sounds interesting.
So we, about 10 years ago or so, we released our first version of our medical web viewer, which connects to a DICOM-enabled storage, and then it enables hospitals and different clinics to load DICOM files, which are, basically your x-rays and your MRIs, into the browser and view them without having to have some type of PC or device. You can pull it up on an iPad or anything like that. So radiologists and doctors, they'll be able to, pull up the patient that they're currently sitting with, that they just took an x-ray of or whatever, and they can pull up the results and look through it, look for, if they're a dentist, they're looking for cavities. If they're doing an MRI, they're looking for different things in the soft tissue. We've had that for a while. And, as you can imagine, especially with it being, JavaScript and web enabled, 10 years is a long time. And so, we've completely rewritten it. It's using modern frameworks like React, using Redux and TypeScript. It's much easier and more modular to integrate into your applications. And it's much faster and more usable by our customers.
Very cool. I have personal stories that I probably have actually used your tools. So that's very interesting to hear. Well, again, LEADTOOLS is at leadtools.com. Hadi, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.